now take a look at Illinois, where reporter Jim Talamonti from the Center Square stands by to tell us about tomorrow's budget address from Governor J.B. Pritzker. Jim, thanks for taking time with us. Tomorrow's going to be a big day, but we've already heard a lot from legislators on both sides of the aisle on what they hope to accomplish this year. Any indication on what the governor plans to address tomorrow at noon?
Well, Greg, thanks so much for having me on. There's going to be a lot we expect in the governor's speech. We've been hearing for several years about a tight budget, and this being a tight year. You have on one hand progressives around the state calling for progressive income tax, progressive tax increases, more revenue to be brought in to fund public education, especially. And on the other hand, you have State House Republicans saying that Illinois just has to get this spending out of control, under control, because under Governor J.B. Pritzker, the spending has increased not just exponentially, but we're looking at billions of dollars since the governor's first budget address in 2019. When the state budget was $39 billion, it's now up to $55.2 billion for the current fiscal year, 2026. So it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of increase we may see. But Republicans are saying, well, the governor has raised taxes. We've seen increases in the gas tax and motor vehicle fees. We've seen hundreds of millions of dollars in corporate tax increases, gambling taxes, cell phone taxes, et cetera, et cetera. And so that spending has been a real focal point. On the other hand, the governor last year, his budget address came shortly, just a few weeks after Donald Trump was inaugurated for the start of his second term. And we saw quite a bit in terms of references, no fewer than 6 Nazi references as the governor talked about President Trump and his administration. And this year we're expecting the governor to take a more economical angle, we might say, and focus on federal funding cuts and how that's hurting Illinois and hurting the state economy. So the governor hasn't released anything officially in terms of a statement or what exactly he's going to do, and lawmakers on both sides are anticipating, eagerly anticipating what's going to happen. There's talk of there's already been some legislation introduced in terms of more revenue measures. We're looking at energy legislation that's out there already. Talk of a transit trailer after major transit legislation last year that included tax increases. So lots on the table here, and a lot for the governor to try to find his way, as he's talked about as a potential presidential candidate in 2028, to kind of find that ground between the progressives who've called for taxes on him and his fellow billionaires, and Republicans who are saying the spending has to be brought under control and we just can't keep taxing people out of the state of Illinois.
And let's take a look at some of those numbers you mentioned, Jim. Illinois spending swelling 43% since the governor took office in 2019. That bar chart just looks like a precipitous incline each year, $39 billion in 2019, all the way up to $55 billion for fiscal year 2026. And you also mentioned the slew of tax increases. Those tax increases, of course, helping fund that $16 billion annual increase. And it might take, 3 minutes to scroll all of those tax increases, but just a few of them that have happened under Governor J.B. Pritzker in 2019. Legislators doubled that gas tax, and they included an annual increase tied to the Consumer Price Index. 2020, increased vehicle registration, parking garage tax, gambling taxes, more than $500 million in corporate tax increases in 2021. And just in the past couple of years, more corporate tax changes, gambling taxes, and so much more. Do you think that there's going to be an appetite to maybe focus on just that millionaire's tax, or do you think maybe they'll try to find some other smaller tax lines to increase spending, if that's what the governor's looking to do?
I think both, Greg. I think we're going to see, we've already seen a really strong push for the millionaire's tax. Even the Speaker of the Illinois House, still a very powerful position with Emmanuel Chris Welch, Hillside Democrat, the Speaker of the House, saying, we want to tax millionaires. We want to do this. And this is something that's been called for by the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, and some of the Chicago Democrats who tend to be more progressive than their counterparts around the state. And they really want this. Some pushing for that constitutional amendment are saying it's for property tax relief, but the current legislation that's been introduced would only send half of that millionaire's tax revenue, if voters were to approve it, to property tax relief. The other half would go to fund public education, and that's where I think you're going to see a push. There's talk there. The state has an evidence-based funding formula. There's legislation to really ramp up to, quote, fully fund public school districts under this evidence-based formula, and that would require a lot more additional spending. And so we have seen additional tax proposals. There's a plastic bag tax that's been introduced that would impose a 10-cent per bag tax. It's not a plastic bag tax. It's a retail carry-out bag tax. So any kind of bag you get, paper, plastic, reusable, whatever bag it is, you carry out of a store with your stuff in it, you're going to get taxed 10 cents, and then that tax will increase incrementally till it hits a quarter. So that legislation's already been filed, and there's something that's generated a lot of controversy: the campfire tax. As it said, a burning permit would be required, and if you don't have that burning permit, you could face heavy fines. The permit itself would be $5, at least at its first introduction, but there's been a lot of back and forth between the bill sponsor, who's a Democrat in an area southwest of Chicago, and some of the State House Republicans who said, well, so now I'm going to go to the store for a camp to get my stuff to make s'mores, and I'm going to get taxed on the bag that I put my graham crackers and marshmallows in, and then if I don't have that permit, I have to go and get this permit just to have a little campfire, and if I don't have it, I could get fined hundreds of dollars. So these tax measures have been introduced. This isn't just in the talking stage. So we'll see if they advance once we get into committees, and we'll see what, if anything, the governor says about some of these tax proposals. But he's indicated, more so than any time previously in his tenure, some support for progressive revenue. In other words, that graduated income tax. He's come out saying he supports that idea.
We'll watch, of course, what the governor has to say about the tax and spend. But as you mentioned earlier, I'm sure he's going to be leaning into the continued conflict between Illinois and the Trump administration when it comes to federal funds for things like SNAP and other social service safety net programs. The governor, though, recently did say he found, close to $500 million in savings. Do you think that's going to be worked into his state of the state and budget proposals tomorrow?
I think so. I think that will be one area where he is going to reach out to show he's trying to be a fiscally responsible governor. And he's each year after the budget address, he's told us this is a balanced budget. So we're working on 7 straight. What the governor says are balanced budgets, and so that's generally a part of his approach, is to say that he's managing things. His predecessor, Bruce Rauner, in pretty much continuous battle with state House Democrats, then controlled by since convicted former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan, there wasn't a budget for some period of time. So state spending dropped, but the governor has said now we have things in order. We've had balanced budgets, whereas we didn't have budgets. So I do think that will be part of his approach. But at the same time, a lot of money flows to non-governmental organizations. We'll see if there are any reductions in those areas. He hasn't talked about it. He's talked about efficiencies in state agencies. He asked state agencies to find some efficiencies and then released somewhat of an outline of some efficiencies across various state agencies. Republicans are anxious to see if there will be reductions in spending on people who are not in the country legally. They've been harping on this for some time now, that the state has spent billions of dollars on health care, education, social services, et cetera, for people who are not in the country legally. So that's going to be very interesting to see if the governor makes further reductions in those areas, or if, again, as some of the immigration activists have pushed for, if there is a return to additional spending in those areas. It's going to be a very interesting angle there. And again, the governor's kind of trying to navigate through these waters, trying to keep everyone as much as he can happy, with the exception, of course, of the Trump administration. And just this morning, the Illinois Senate Republican leader, John Curran, said that, Illinois' antagonistic approach toward the federal government has hurt Illinois. And this is why, part of the reason we're having these issues. And, it would work better if we would be collaborating instead of being antagonistic, and that further threatens the state's economy. So we'll see. John Curran, the Republican Senate leader in Illinois, really called for called the governor's approach up to this point very partisan, and was hoping to see that change. We'll see if it does. But I don't think too many of us expect the governor to back off on his criticism of President Trump.
Especially in an election year, Jim, and you've got that ongoing consternation, but also the expected mantra of affordability that's going to be working through not just Illinois, but state houses all throughout the country. So we'll definitely be watching closely, Jim. Thank you so much for taking time with us here for the Center Square Daily. A couple of other quick Illinois headlines we'll be watching. You got a gubernatorial primary coming up March 17th. 4 Republicans on the ballot. One of them, Ted Dabrowski, he announced that he is suing some officials over ballot mistakes. You'll be able to read more about that at the Center Square soon. Plus, you've got the ongoing question of the gun ban in Illinois and the challenges that the Supreme Court could take up, and that includes one out of Cook County. And that measure has been challenged and brought through the federal courts all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. They have put it into conference several times, and they have yet to announce whether they'll take that gun ban challenge out of Cook County. But they have it in conference this Friday. We could know early next week if the Supreme Court will take that case out of Illinois. All right, from my studios here in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. And join us back here tomorrow for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from across the country, only with the Center Square Daily.